I would say it's safe. This is a safe environment to say that all of us have some inkling of bungee jumping. We may never, ever in our life ever want to do what's referred to as extreme sports, but we have some idea of what it's like. We have seen people jump off a box or a cliff or a bridge or something like that as they bounce up and down, dangling, and then finally, hopefully, dropping to the ground in a safe manner. Well, as with all sports, everything has its origin. And I've come across a story about the origins of bungee jumping, specifically how it was introduced to another country, as this story says, in Mexico. 2 New York entrepreneurs decided to see if some money might be made introducing bungee jumping to Mexico. They fronted some venture capital to build a platform so these people who love extreme sports could jump off dangling just on a bungee cord. And so when it came time for the trial run, the 2 entrepreneurs climbed up to the platform, looked down at the gathering crowd, and they knew what they had to do. And so they sat there and they played rock, paper, scissors to see who was going to be the first one to give the Mexican crowd an example. And the one who won, or lost, however you look at it, put on the harness and he dove off. When he came up the first time, his partner noticed that his face was kind of bloody. Ooh, this is not good. When he came up the second time, it was obvious that one eye was turning black. Came up a third time, and part of his ear was missing. The one on the top yelled out, "Are you okay?" And the one at the bottom says, "What's a piñata?" Now I realize that joke is just as bad as the one we introduced last week about our sermon series. Let's do it here. How does Moses make coffee? He brews it. That's right. I was telling someone in the community this week about what I refer to as the worst pun in Bible history, and this guy said, "No, it is just the worst pastor joke I've ever heard." So we have been learning some wonderful things about the Bible and our coffee ministry with these lessons from the book of Hebrews. And today is a fantastic lesson on faith. Faith is something that we rely on. Faith is something that helps us rest on the assurance that God has the best in store for us. Faith is the conviction that it will be okay. And faith, I can tell you, is a lot easier to preach on than to actually practice it. I still remember the conversation. I was on the back porch. We were living in Aurora, Nebraska. I had just been appointed to another church, hadn't moved there yet, and I was on the phone with my secretary with the church that I was going to be moving to. And she wanted to order Sunday school material. Now, it wasn't just a conversation about what kind of material to order or what kind of curriculum to order. She was calling because there was hardly any kids in Sunday school. And she was wondering what was I going to do about it. And I remember saying to her, "Well, it'll be okay." I said, "We move in about a month, and when I get up there, we're going to assess the situation. We're going to come up with a plan, and we're going to figure it out, and it will be okay." And I remember hanging up the phone, and I turned to Sarah, and I said, "Oh my God, I am scared to death." Here we have little kids. We're moving up to a community that didn't have any Sunday school. What am I going to do? I had no assurance that it was going to work out. I had no idea what was in plan, what was in store of the future. We were moving in just about a month on pure faith. And this is where coffee comes in. Now, I will tell you, that night I did not reach for a cup of coffee. But the connection there is with faith. Because faith is believing that the best is just around the corner. Even if we can't see it, even if it relies on complete blindness on what the future holds, faith is the assurance that it will be okay. Today, as we hear this lesson from the book of Hebrews, I want you to remember that faith is the best part of waking up. Would you go ahead and share with us?
Reading from the 11th chapter of Hebrews, verses 1 through 3. To have faith is to be sure of the things we hope for, to be certain of the things we cannot see. It was by their faith that the people of ancient times won God's approval. It is by faith that we understand that the universe was created by God's word, so that what can be seen was made out of what cannot be seen. Now we jump over to the 8th verse. It was faith that made Abraham obey when God called him to go out to a country which God had promised to give him. He left his own country without knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as a foreigner in the country that God had promised him. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who received the same promise from God. For Abraham was waiting for the city which God has designed and built, the city with permanent foundations. It was faith that made Abraham able to become a father, even though he was too old, and Sarah herself could not have children. He trusted God to keep his promise. Though Abraham was practically dead, from this one man came as many descendants as there are stars in the sky, as many as the numberless grains of sand on the seashore. It was in faith that all of these persons died. They did not receive the things God had promised, but from a long way off they saw them and welcomed them, and admitted openly that they were foreigners and refugees on earth. Those who say such things make it clear that they are looking for a country of their own. They did not keep thinking about the country they had left. If they had, they would have had a chance to return. Instead, it was a better country they longed for, the heavenly country. And so God is not surprised, not ashamed for them to call him their God, because he has prepared a city for them. May God add his blessing to the reading.
Thank you, Bruce. As I shared last week, the book of Hebrews is a letter written to a community in crisis. Now, we don't know who wrote the letter. We don't even know who it was written to. But what we do know is that these letters were read and reread and shared because they provide wonderful lessons on encouragement, hope, and faith. There's a story about a holy man who was sitting in the doorway of his hut at sunset. His dog was stretched out right on the doorway there, and as a spiritual seeker sought out the old man, this man who approached the holy man said, "Why is it, Abba, that some who seek God to the desert and are zealous in prayer, but leave after a year or so, while others like you remain faithful to the quest for a lifetime?" The old man smiled and replied by telling him a story. "One day, sitting in the sun with my dog, a large white rabbit ran across in front of us. My dog jumped up, barking loudly, and took off after that white rabbit with a passion. Soon other dogs joined him, attracted by his barking, across the creeks, up stony embankments, and through thickets and thorns. Gradually, however, one by one, the other dogs dropped out of the pursuit, discouraged and frustrated by the chase. Only my dog continued to hotly pursue the white rabbit. In that story, young man, is the answer to your question." Well, the young man kind of sat there in silence, and after a while he said, "Abba, I don't understand. What is the connection between the rabbit chase and the quest for holiness?" The old man looked at the seeker and said, "You fail to understand because you failed to ask the obvious question. Why didn't the other dogs continue the chase?" And the answer to that question is that they had not seen the rabbit. Unless you see your prey, the chase is just too difficult. You will lack the passion and determination necessary to perform all the hard work required by the discipline of your spiritual exercises. In essence, the old wise man was saying, keep your eyes focused on your prey. Whether it is spiritual exercises, spiritual discipline, spiritual understanding, for that will continue to allow you to stay on that quest. It's the faith in the unknown. You don't know how it's going to turn out, but you do know, hopefully, that you will receive your prize. And that, my friends, is the best part. Our title for this morning is The Best Part of Waking Up. Now, anyone that is my age or older, you remember those Folgers commercials. Talk about a fantastic bit of branding and commercialization. You walk into the store, you see the Folgers, you start thinking about the commercial you saw, you start humming the song, and just think what that song meant. No matter what happened the night before, no matter if you had a bad night of sleep, no matter if you woke up and there were toys all over the place, the kitchen was a mess, no matter if you had to go to school the next morning or you had to go to a job that you didn't want to go to, the best part of waking up. I mean, what a fantastic image. And I do believe that if the writer of Hebrews would have had a good marketing director like Folgers, he probably would have talked about Folgers in this lesson. Let's read it again. Let's go ahead and read this passage together. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. That, my friends, is an ideal that I long for. Truly, the best part of waking up is this beautiful moment of hope. It's the best part of faith. We walk into the unknown believing, truly believing that God walks with us with the assurance that it will be okay. But as I shared with you, it's a lot easier to preach about faith than it is to actually put it into practice. William Willimon is a bishop in our church and tells a beautiful story about what this exactly looks like. Very early on in his ministry, he served this church in the southeastern part of the United States, and it was a predominantly white church, but he had a black parishioner that came to that church because it was one of the few places that she felt comfortable. And so Dr. Willimon got the opportunity to meet her and visit with her and learn her story, and it was a tragic one. The previous year, her beloved husband of many years had died a terrible and painful death. Her only son was in jail after a sleazy banking deal went bad. Now, she had just taken in her 2 little grandchildren as her sole responsibility, even though she was now getting on in years. Bishop Willimon says that he visited with her, and he just felt this overwhelming sense of futility. What would become of her now? How could she hope to overcome these difficulties? And yet she, expressing faith born out of years of struggle and pain, said to him, I know God will make a way for us. I found that when I've reached out, he'll be there. Not always when I wanted him, but always when I absolutely needed him. He doesn't always come on time, but he always comes. I'll make it with his help. Yes, I will. Now, Bishop Willimon says that he was pretty young in his ministry. And so he kind of pressed her on this, and he says, how can this be? You've got these 2 children, huge financial problems, your health isn't great, after all that you have been through. Essentially, he was saying in his educated, sophisticated way, you gotta face the facts, lady, you're not being realistic here. As I said, it's easier to preach on faith than it is to practice. And that's understandable. I brought with us a show and tell item here. Cafe Salvador. For equal exchange, this is their oldest blend of coffee. Now, what I wanted to bring was a coffee called Cafe Nika, but they do not make that coffee anymore. And one of the things when we think about faith, we always ask the question, why? Why do we rely on faith? Why do we go out into the unknown? Why do we have this sense of going into what is unbelievably unheard of for us on pure faith? Well, Cafe Salvador, I believe, for Equal Exchange is the why. Why does Equal Exchange continue to do the ministry that they do with their coffee? It's part of their heritage. Just listen to this story of how Equal Exchange got started. Fairness to farmers, a closer connection between people and the farmers we all rely on. This was the essence of the vision that three Equal Exchange founders, Jonathan Rosenthal, Michael Rosny, and Rink Dinkelson, held in their minds and hearts as they stood together on a metaphorical cliff back in 1986. The three, who had met each other as managers at a New England food co-op, were part of a movement to transform the relationship between the public and food producers. At the time, however, these efforts didn't extend to farmers outside the U.S. It was a grand vision with a somewhat shaky grounding in reality. But Rink, Jonathan, and Michael understood that significant change only happens when you're open to taking big risks. So they cried, "Adelante!" Rough translation from the Spanish, "no turning back," and took a running leap off the cliff. They left their jobs, they invested their own money, and they turned to their families and friends for startup funds and let them know that there was a good chance that they would never see their money again. The core group of folks believed in their cause and decided to invest. Their checks provided the $100,000 needed to start the new company. With this modest financing in hand, Rink, Jonathan, and Michael headed into the great unknown. At best, the project, which coupled a private business model with a nonprofit mission, was viewed as utopian. At worst, it was regarded as foolish. For the first 3 years, Equal Exchange struggled, and like many new ventures, lost money. But the founders hung on. By the third year, they began to break even. Now, I'm going to skip ahead in their story. You can read more about it on their website. But I want to talk about Cafe Nica, or what they call the forbidden coffee. They chose Nicaraguan coffee, which they called Cafe Nica, as the first Equal Exchange product for a few reasons. In 1986, the Reagan administration imposed an embargo on all products from Nicaragua's Sandinista government. Importing coffee beans from Nicaragua would demonstrate solidarity with the fledgling people's movement and would challenge U.S. trade policies. Equal Exchange brought Nicaraguan coffee into the U.S. through a loophole in the law. If the coffee was roasted in another country, it could be regarded as a product from that country, and therefore legally imported into the U.S. A friendly Dutch alternative trade organization stepped forward to offer assistance with the brokering and roasting. Alerted to this symbolic action, the Reagan administration tried to stop the tiny organization. Officials seized Equal Exchange's Nicaraguan coffee as soon as it arrived in port of Boston. During their first 2 years of business, the founders spent many days with trade lawyers at their side doing battle with custom officials. Each time the coffee cargo was released, it was a small victory. Adelante, no turning back. I like to think of it as another way of saying the best part of waking up, or the best part of faith. Because when it comes to preaching about faith and putting into practice, I think of this concept of adelante, no turning back. I mean, once you've taken that leap to start your own business, knowing that you don't have to stamp a time clock anymore, but knowing that you're not going to have a salary for a while, I mean, that's adelante. Or maybe once you've taken that step to go back to school because you want to earn a degree and maybe have a better job, but as you're sitting at that computer doing some online work and you're doing reading you haven't done in 20 years and you're writing papers you haven't done in 20 years and you're looking around the house and all the things that need to be done, I mean, that's adelante. Once you've signed up for our Financial Peace University course, and you've picked up that motto of live like no one else so that later that I can live like no one else, that's adelante. Once we have prayed to God for direction, and we just kind of get this nudge that says, you know, maybe I can teach Sunday school for 1 month. I can do that, or maybe I can help out with the soup kitchen and make some phone calls, or maybe I can talk to the pastor about how I can serve in the church, or maybe be a leader, or just do things purely on faith. That's adelante, no turning back. Or maybe once we have recommitted ourselves to our marriage and to our children and to our friends, that is no turning back. That's the best part of waking up. Because with faith, it is an attitude change. Robert Sutton writes a fantastic article in the magazine Leadership about exactly what faith as an attitude looks like. He talks about seeing a TV documentary about blind skiers and how they had to rely completely on the trust of their sighted skiers. I went skiing for the first time in March, and I cannot imagine not being able to see what I'm looking at. Maybe it would have been better. When I fell, I wouldn't have known it. But all they had to do is in their training in the documentary, when the sighted people said, you turn right, and they taught them how to teach how to turn left, and they turned left. And once they graduated from that, they actually went onto the slopes. And relying purely on sound of the sighted skiers, their guide, they went down the slopes. And when they turned right, they turned right. And when they turned left, when they were told to turn left, they went left. And they went on down to pass the finishing course. As the commentator on the documentary says, it was either complete trust or an ultimate catastrophe. That's faith. That is faith, which is about life. Complete trust that God loves us, and more importantly, that God is for us, regardless of the circumstances. It's trusting God just like trusting those blind skiers trusting their guides. And that's why I believe that our coffee ministry is an attitude. Sure, we love it. Every morning we wake up, it's caffeine. It's the best part of waking up. It wakes us up. We like the taste. But the best part of waking up to Cafe Salvador is knowing that it makes a difference. You see, every time I purchase Equal Exchange, I like to think of it as a gift. The company only buys from cooperatives. And these cooperatives are required to reinvest their profits into health education, providing schools, and have to be democratically run. And that's saying a lot for some of these countries that are run by a dictator. These co-ops are pledging to make a difference. Now that's a gift. A gift relying solely on faith. And that's something I can preach on. Because I know that every time that I purchase Equal Exchange, I don't have to go to these cooperatives and know that they are making a difference. It's a gift that has just been placed into my hands. Peter Haynes tells this story about a woman named Judy. Judy, if it wasn't for bad luck, she would have no luck at all. She was kind of like that poor guy in the bungee jumping story I told earlier. Everything seemed to go wrong. When she went skiing, she would either fall down and she'd break a leg or she'd fracture an arm. When she'd go walking down a country lane, she would lean against a picket fence, and of course the picket fence would just fall over. Well, one day she was determined that she was not going to get it wrong, and so she decided to bake some bread. And so she took out the recipe and she carefully gathered all the ingredients it called for, and she followed it step by step by step. But there was a slight problem, however. Instead of adding just one cake of yeast to the mix as required, she added a whole box. Several cakes of yeast. Well, you can imagine what happened next. The dough began to grow and grow and grow. She added more flour, and it continued to grow and grow and grow. She added more water, and it continued to grow. She added more salt, more wheat germ, more oil, and it just kept on growing and growing. She tried cutting the mound of dough in half and pounding on it and pleading with it, and it just kept on growing and growing and growing. And finally, in desperation, she went out to the backyard, and she dug a hole, and she just buried it right into the yard. Just get out of the sight. And then her father came home and came in through the backyard and says, "There is something growing in our backyard." You know what happened? The sun beat down on that ill-fated mound of dough, that unbaked loaf, and though it was even buried in the ground, it brought the yeast back to life. And it started growing, and it burst out of the ground. Even the grave couldn't contain it. Faith is a gift. Jesus taught us this in the Easter experience. It was shared with the people in the book of Hebrews, and this gift is life-changing to the people around the world who are living on a fair wage. This is the best part of waking up. Amen. I'm going to ask